In this video, I'm going to give an overview on a lot of information that is important to understand for mixing trompe-l'oeil colors. First, I'm going to explain how different colored lights interact with an object and provide painted examples of how the color of your highlight and shadow work together. Then I'll give a step-by-step demonstration of a quick trompe-l'oeil process. The color of the light determines the color of the highlight and shadow. You can go deep into color theory about this, but the standard and basic rule is warm highlights have cool shadows and cool highlights have warm shadows. Following this helps give depth and is most effective if the cast shadow is a desaturated complement to the color of the light. We are most accustomed to having warm light sources like yellow sunlight, orange firelight, or yellowish light bulbs, so you'll see warm highlights and cool shadows most often. But looking at these objects lit with a warm light, you might wonder if that really is the case. But it is an extremely subtle difference. If I boost the saturation and lighten the shadows, you can see that the cast shadow is slightly purple. These objects, when lit with a strong blue light, at first do not appear to have a warm shadow, but if I again boost the saturation and lighten the shadows, you can tell that the shadows are subtly warm. Things get really interesting with two colored light sources. If an object is lit from two directions with different colored lights, then places hidden from both lights will have a black shadow, but places obscured from only one light will have the color of the other light. So taking these principles, I painted 6 repeats of the same object with varying highlight and shadow colors. It is extremely subtle, but the point is made. The first 2 follow the standard color rule and look the most natural. This one has the same orange highlight as the first, but has a more purple shadow, which looks fine, but not as good as the blue, partially because blue shadows are what we are accustomed to, but also because purple is not the complementary color to orange. This one has a warm highlight and warm shadow, which just looks off. This one was painted with a straight white highlight and a straight black shadow. Though technically correct, it doesn't have the same depth and interest as the others. The last one has the same colors as the first, but I attempted to make it look more stylized and bold, which is not my strong suit. I like to be fussy. But here is an example of a drop that has more bold theatrical brush strokes. Okay, now on to the actual sample I painted for this video. I started with 3 colors and created a basic texture with them. The colors each had varying levels of white, black, yellow ochre, burnt sienna, and Van Dyke brown in them. Completely finish your base treatment before you move on. So if you're doing marble or wood, it should look completely finished. Then cartoon or draw out your design onto your surface. I used transfer paper for mine. As I mentioned in part 1, I like to start with shade, which is typically a darker version of the object color. So I took my darkest base color and added in black and water so it would be transparent. You don't want to use thick paint and dip your brush in water each time you charge your brush because it won't be consistent, so mix a quantity of it thinned. You also need a brush for paint and a brush for water. Often it is best to work in layers and gradually build up to the correct value. You don't have to and often shouldn't hit the final value in one pass. If your base object has a lot going on and you aren't sure if you have the right color for your shade, it helps to squint at the base and shade colors together to see if it looks natural. Also, if your base object has a lot of different colors, make your shade from the most dominant color, and because the shade is transparent, it should work okay along with the other colors in your base. Again, if you are uncertain, squint at it. If you have questions about where to place the shade, shadow, and highlight, check out the part 1 video I made that covers that information. For a feathered edge, if you watch carefully, you can see that I brush water onto the surface before I apply paint, and then use the water brush again if necessary to smudge the edges more. As I mentioned before, the cast shadow color often is the complementary color of the highlight. I mixed Prussian blue, black, and Van Dyke brown together and added water so it would be transparent. I included Van Dyke Brown to help further desaturate the blue, but I also wanted to include a color from the base colors to help them play well together. Just because the shadow is bluish does not mean that it should be a very saturate blue. This is a pretty basic concept. When it is dark, colors start to lose saturation. Just think of how colored objects in your room look when you turn off the lights. Next, I mixed the highlight, which was made from the lightest base color, white and yellow ochre. The highlight should be mixed with water to make it transparent as well. I used the lightest base color because conventionally, the color of the highlight is a higher value version of the object color, but it is influenced by the light source. I added in more yellow ochre because I decided my light source was yellowish. Something I didn't really demonstrate in this painting is that there are sometimes two highlight values, the primary highlight and an even lighter secondary highlight. The secondary highlight is usually just a few small hotspots on a shiny object. Once all of the elements are there and I see them together, I finish by pushing the contrasts, if needed, and adding the final details such as the cut line. It is important throughout the process to step back often, but it is especially important at this point because you need to gauge if you have been bold enough. Don't be afraid of contrast. I'm going to pause this demonstration to show you a trompe-l'oeil I did early on as a student. I didn't know much about trompe-l'oeil at the time, and as I mentioned, I have a tendency to be fussy and subtle. While it looks decent, it wasn't bold enough to read from the audience. You could barely see it, which was so disappointing. So remember what it is being made for and that you can really push and be bold in theater. It has to be effective from the audience. My last tip, as ironic as it is don't fuss with it too much. Know when to stop. I easily could have kept going with this sample, but I decided the overall effect was sufficient. Plus, I was just tired of sitting on the floor. Alright, that's it for this video. Let me know if you have any questions, comments, suggestions for future videos, or if you think of anything I missed in this overview.